This is from the 5th century. A Spanish ship has set sail in search of India. They sail for the several months. Eventually they get the land. What he meant by India was in fact not India but the America. For a long time they considered this place as India. They continued to travel from there and settle down themselves. But later when the India was discovered, then they realized that this is not India, rather they are in search of India, discovered another continent. Spain, France and Britain were the great powers of that time. These people started coming and settling here. Similarly, Britain began to settle its people here. Britain settled its people in America. At that time, Britain had made America its colony. At that time, the United States has only 13 states, and that time there was a competition between the Britain and France. Both countries wanted to occupy the America as much as possible. And it was not this point that the global war broken out between the two countries. France and Britain were also fighting in the United States. The United States was not independent at that time, but a British colony. The American peoples were fighting France for Britain. A soldier was killed during the same battle. He was a brave major. When he was martyred in the war, his place was given to his brother. His brother was also a capable man. He was fond of horse riding and archery, and he was an expert in that. He also wanted to be a soldier like his brother since childhood. He was a landowner, but when he got the chance to join the army, he did not give up. When he joined the army, so his soldiers did not listen to him because they did not consider him worthy. But when there was a practical war, so this soldier fought hard against the enemy. And when his soldiers saw his war strategy, so they were impressed and obeyed him. He led his army to the best of his ability. He faced many difficulties in the war, but he was instrumental in bringing victory to Britain. But this is the man who is helping Britain win. Who knew he would fight Britain? He will set these people free and will defeat the superpower of this era. Hi, I am Saad Umar and you are watching Geo Library, and in today's video I am showing you the biography of founder of United States, George Washington. George Washington fought France for Britain. George Washington fought valiantly. As we read about many heroes that they were poor at first and later became a successful person. But that's not the case with George Washington. George Washington came from a worthy family, but he was not famous. But not after the victories of the war. Not only was he famous, but he was also seen as a successful man. The war between the Britain and the France will be fought from the 1756 to 1763. Britain finally won the war. When the Britain won the war, George Washington also left the army and returned to his home. He returned home and started farming. Britain won the war, but there was a problem with that. That is, they won the war, but they still had a lot of debt. They suffered greatly from the war. George Washington, who was isolated from the world and engaged in farming, he made a lot of the land where he used to work with his slave. He used to cultivate tobacco and rice etc. on his lands. Life went on like this, but there are some changes in the United States. The war cost Britain dearly economically. As a result, the Great Britain began to levy United States taxes to cover its losses. The Britain taxed many things such as paper. The American people were angry because of the tax. But the anger of the American people came when the Britain also taxes tea. Americans used to drink a lot of tea. The American forbade the Britain to tax tea. That is why the revolt took place. For the first time, the American people demanded freedom. The American people did not want to pay any taxes. At that time, the United States has only 13 states. These states were autonomous and under the British rule. This was the first time that all the states were united and the United States was formed. The American people also formed a political cabinet called the Continental Congress. They declared their independence, and that's how their War of Independence began. They appointed the George Washington as their warlord. The main reason for this was that the George Washington made a name himself because of his skills and bravery. And the second was that they had no other commander like George Washington who ever had the combat experience. This is the fate that given George Washington a chance to go down in the history. When the news reached the George Washington, so he was not happy about it. But he had to do this for his people, for his country. The Americans were worrying small uprising against Britain. But then came the night of December 16, 1773, when American liberals entered the city of Boston. They attacked the British port of Boston. They sank the cargo of the 3 British ships. These 3 ships were the tea ships. Today, the world remembers this moment as the Boston Tea Party. This was the event that started the regular war between the British and the American people. The American people revolted against the Britain army. George Washington was commanding them. George Washington fought 9 wars against the British. George Washington was considered a successful and courageous leader. He won only 3 wars against Britain. He lost 6 wars, but there was nothing wrong with him. The army that George Washington had has not like the regular British army. There were many young boys in the George Washington army who had no idea of the war, and there were many others who did not even have the regular weapons of the war. And his army was also not financially strong, because it was an atmosphere of war and their countries was not free. George Washington had to face then the superpower Britain. Apart from the opposition army, what became a challenge for him was the cold weather here. People had also settled that if anyone could set them free, he was only and only George Washington. George Washington faced many difficulties. He defeated many in the war. It seemed that the Britain had put an end to the American uprising. The American people's hope for freedom also seemed to be waning, but then the story changed. During this period, 2 world powers, Britain and France, as I told you a while ago, the Britain defeated the France. The France wanted revenge for his defeat, so France started helping the American people against Britain. Then the tide of battle turned. France also began to fully support the United States. French generals also began training US forces on a regular basis. The French Navy also providing sufficient support to United forces. As time went on, the war continued, but no one was able to defeat anyone clearly. But then something happened. That the British army was present in the Yorktown area of the state Virginia. The area is surrounded by the water on the 3 sides. On the one hand, the United States military took advantage of this situation and attacked. Because of this, the British army became to siege. But because, as I said before, the area was surrounded by the water on the 3 sides, that is, if the British army wanted to get out of there, the only way they could get out was by sea. But this route was blocked by the French Navy. The French Navy completely surrounded the area. Then British had no choice. Because of this, the British conceded defeat and surrender. On July 4, 1776, the United States declared its independence. The United States still celebrates its Independence Day on July 4. In 1777, the British completely lost to the United States. In September 1783, a peace treaty was signed between the United States, France, and Britain. Under the agreement, Britain recognized the United States as an independent country. When the George Washington returned to his hometown after winning the war with Britain, he was greeted like a hero. Many people worked for the independence of the United States, but the George Washington is considered the founder of the United States. The George Washington thought that once the war was over, it would return to his hometown. After the independence of the United States, election had to be held in the United States. George Washington did not want to be a president, but the people wanted to see him as president. That's why the George Washington became President of the United States at the behest of the people. People liked him. He was twice elected President of the United States for 4 years. He did a lot for the development of the United States. George Washington was a successful man. This is the mountain you see on the screen. It is a famous mountain with statues of some American most famous people. One of them is statue of the George Washington. George Washington was a successful politician, successful man, and did many things for the United States. But still, he has done things that people do not like. What was the reason? George Washington came in army and liberated America, but how did he came in the army? How George Washington traveled to success? I will give you the answers to all the questions, but in the next video. That was the story of the creator of the America. If you want to see the story of the survivor of America, biography of Abraham Lincoln, so take the right side of the screen. If you want to see the biography of Elon Musk, then take the left side of screen.